Well, thank you, Alice, and thank you to the library, and thank you to all of you for coming. So I'm going to start by just jumping into reading a couple of postcards, and then I'll, talk more background. This is called Alton Bay Postcard, and Alton Bay is up on Lake Winnipesaukee. Sleep fills the houses like a gas. Whatever flies were caught inside are curled up on windowsills, filled with a small, dry sleep. Real estate calendars yellow on August. The bay's snapshot blue is just as deep as when we stopped here 30 years ago. Do you remember? The Winnebago cabins beckon. Perhaps we could keep house here a few weeks next summer. That local girl we met has left to marry now, I'm sure, but brings her children back. She'd know they're more like tourists now, who come here but forget that, since in her heart the bay's still hers. Although we were just passing through, the barbershop quartet sang songs I knew, and I loved her. This was my hometown for an hour. And this is Evanston Postcard, which is right outside of Chicago, and that is my actual hometown. The elms are dead, and actually when you pointed out those trees, I'm sure those were elms, but they're all gone because of Dutch elm disease. The elms are dead, the old library's gone, the war is over in Vietnam. A sign mentions the internet, so I can't pretend it's 1968. The old library had a fireplace with real fires all winter long. Different songs blare from radios down at the lake. Waves pound the beach like a migraine headache. Do air raid sirens drill still each Tuesday at 10:30? I thought the garbage men were poor, but they were only dirty. Petunias were tornadoes planted by the neighbors from Greece or Germany, some regime. At least 4 countries called our block home. That maple we planted when my brother was born no longer swoons in the wind. It's just blank lawn. I didn't know the PO was WPA. How little I knew before we moved away. I saw the garage where my mother died. I don't think she knew how her suicide would change us. How little we remember. Hometowns trap the past in tiny bits of amber. The store where shoes were bought each fall, the township pool, the heady smell of lilacs. Then comes the future's wrecking ball. I wander streets I walked down then, but now I'm her age, not 10, though I don't know how that happened. I dreamt this visit anyway. The real town stopped, my own Pompeii, when Chandler still sold Girl Scout outfits and Fields was open, making profits. It's summer, children play outside. Time will never reach the day she died. I just saw a thing, so when Marshall Fields was bought by Macy's, Macy's changed the name, and Chicago has not forgiven them. People boycott Macy's, and I just saw a hat that said, "Make Macy's Marshall Fields again." So I've always loved postcards. In our attic, I discovered a book of my Uncle Siegfried's postcards, many of them this vintage. And ultimately, I had my own collection of postcards. Even got a couple of those twirly things, you know. And I brought just a few of them there at the back by a stack of my books. You're not allowed to take those postcards. You can only take the postcards on the other side. You know, they are wonderful for all the reasons that Alice mentioned. I don't exactly remember how I started writing postcard poems. I actually realized that I started doing it a lot sooner than with this, my second book, which is primarily postcard poems. And I had written a few that were from Croatia, where some of my family came from, and that was in my first book. And the first book, each poem was kind of an island. You know, it wasn't part of the theme that I knew about until later. You know, then I saw the arc. But then as I started writing these postcard poems, suddenly that sort of became the vessel for what I had to say, for a while at least. In my non-writing life, I am a city planner, and I work in downtown revitalization. So obviously postcards are often from cities and downtowns and that kind of thing. So that was a nice correlation. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? You know, and then of course some of the conventions of postcards, wish you were here, greetings from wherever, you know, those are fun to incorporate in the poems. They're shorter, they can be humorous, as we've seen. And for me, you know, I try to be funny in real life, and to take that out of poetry just seems tragic. So it's nice to be able to keep that in poems. So, you know, I feel like postcards are just less formal than letters. So let me read another poem that, it's actually two postcards in one poem, and it's kind of a downtown manifesto in some ways. And I don't know how many of you here are poets or artists who've gone to a colony. Usually there's fantastic food and la la la. Well, I ended up at one where it shared space with a retired priest's residence, and it was in Indiana, right on the border with Kentucky, an area called Kentuckiana, and where we ate with where they would wheel the priests in their wheelchairs was like a 1950s school cafeteria, and the food had just as much sodium as you would have had then. So I ended up going into the nearby town to eat many of my meals, and that is where these two postcards came from. And just so you can tell, because you can't see it, when I go like this, that I'm just quoting the actual signs that I saw in the town. So Kentuckiana postcards. 1. Hello from nowhere in particular, and yet another town I fell in love with. It's the usual, the washateria, hubcaps galore, Little Chef Diner, not to mention Faith Liquors. I'm so predictable. All the downtown buildings need to do is raise their painted eyebrows slightly or flash old-fashioned neon, and I'm gone, like making wedding plans on the first date. I browse for next year's calendar, they're in, though it's July, and get my shoe size checked. It changes year to year. I must find out if they serve Jell-O here, or it could never work. The theater is closed, of course, so you can buy appliances and furniture, tent sale today, and the jeweler's still open. But where can I get the fiancé to buy them for? Am I a fool or what to think love and towns like this should last forever? One more walk by the river and I know I must go, like the ghosts unkissed in the balcony, while the screen below flickers with lovers. And this is the second. Yup, another place whose curlicues and neon and blank marquee seduced me. If I paid dues at every Oddfellows I've photographed, but I worried that the waitress hated Jews. It took so long to get my order, and she had tattoos, till I saw she was just nervous. Turns out she's very new here. One by one, the other diners confessed to me how far away they've been from Indiana. Boston, Seattle, 13 years in New York. In an ironic contest one trucker supplied mileage for. Then each explained why he'd come back, as if I'd somehow disapprove of that. I, in turn, pretended I was from somewhere, though after 20 years, I still get called a breezer. I couldn't say, I want to be a regular in every town like this. Each street seems so evocative of all the lives I could have led, like the one where I run the public library, the one in which my mother hadn't died, and one in the last century when I was, can you imagine it, the haberdasher's bride. The life where I have children, the one in which I'll never go abroad and read the Bible daily. The life where I work at Little Chef and serve my other self the tea. The 4 refill limit would not apply to me. The one in which instead of go, I'd stay. And I can tell you I have lived in Waltham now for 47 years, and I still get called a breezer, as in breeze in, breeze out. It'll never change. Robert Frost said that a poem begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a lovesickness. And I think there's something of that we saw in these postcards. And, you know, we're often writing from a place that we are just visiting and sort of trying to make it like our temporary home and trying to be an expert on this place and reporting back to our actual home. I moved a lot when I was a kid, and so homesickness is kind of my perpetual state, but of course I'm curious and want to see new places. So for me, the tension between going and staying that's very strong. I don't know how many of you do this, but like I'll be visiting a place just for a few days, and instead of going to a different place for breakfast, I'll keep going to the same place because I sort of want to be a regular for a second at least. Richard Hugo, a wonderful, thank you, a wonderful poet, wrote 13 Letters and 13 Dreams, which I recommend. And he also wrote essays called The Triggering Town. And obviously these people were triggered by Falmouth, and I've been triggered by a lot of places. And what I love what he says, the poem is always in your hometown, but you have a better chance of finding it in another.
That's great.
So when I wasn't eating at that little chef diner, I explored other places nearby, and one of them was Corydon, Indiana. And again, trying to imagine what it was like to live there. Greetings from the old state capitol. I'm camped out on the bandstand at Elm and Beaver, trying to understand the feel of living here forever. Down at the drugstore soda fountain, I found some true necessities of Indiana life. Windproof Zippos, Dr. Grabo pre-smoked pipes, paint chips, communion cards, 2 plastic swordfish. Now all I need is a wife. Where would I work? Forever Young, Emporium Mall, Indian Creek? Or have I gotten married to the soda jerk? I think that's me, working at the Goodwill store, so ingrained by now, I know exactly who wore what before it found its way to the collection box. There are folks who stop here for a $30 rolling pin or other overpriced antiques. I know they think we're podunk freaks who don't have network television, but there's enough to make a life from almost anywhere. Lunch at Jock's, sweet, hungry sex, bandstand concerts in the summertime, a house on Cherry, someone to marry, a wake at the awninged funeral home. It's enough to make a life from, or at least to make a poem. So speaking of the knowing who wore what before it was donated, Jan, I don't know if you remember this, but my niece once told me that she had seen my book at the Falmouth Public Library book sale. And I think I know who donated it. I think it was my step-sibling's stepmother, and she was moving to Florida, and I thought, pretty sure that Fair Goldstein is the one who donated my book. You know, sometimes, like I've seen on, you know, resale places that somebody was selling my book and it was an autographed copy, and I'm like looking at it, who sold my book? And luckily it's, you know, I've never known who it was. It was, you know, random person I met at a
How much they get for it?
Right. It's probably less than the non-autograph one, but you know, so far none of my best friends have sold my book on Amazon. So some of my poems actually started as true postcards, and you know, you'll be someplace and you'll write a whole bunch of postcards from the same place to a bunch of different people. So as I was writing them, it was like successive drafts of a poem. I would get them better and better. And then I would say, oh, that's a postcard poem. So That may be how this one started, I don't know. So here's one that's kind of uses the postcardy conventions. Niagara Falls postcard. Greetings from the capital of love, whose cataracts a punster might foretell. Next time we come, we'll plan for a motel. One afternoon is simply not enough. Where other tourists see the bridal veil, I watch the ghosts of buffaloes herded off 1,000 cliffs by hunters. Gulls circle as if they were white buzzards. They wait to no avail. Sorry to be cynical, I buy some souvenirs, small TV sets with slides of all the sights in living color. The primal screams are missing. The hunters have their alibi, but what is mine? Can I love a girl afraid of every honeymoon's cheap thrills, like holding hands in public or acting like a fool? Yours, of course, until Niagara Falls. And here's another one from that same area. This is Buffalo postcard. And for those of you who don't know French, Beau Fleuve means beautiful river. Snow sweetens the rooftops of this city where more millionaires lived once upon a time than anywhere. Steel leaves its sooty legacy elsewhere now. Poverty redeems the coupons here. Though one can see the seedy avenues with grandeur in them easily, grand dames who lived beyond their means for love. Robin Hood would feel at home in this locale. Do you believe the town was named Beau Fleuve before bewildered bison became the local mascot and white men wrecked the river's laugh with their canal? Typical, n'est-ce pas? Your Buffalo gal. How am I doing on time? Okay, I wrote a bunch of poems from the South. And as you heard, I grew up outside of Chicago, and then later in Chicago, and then moved out here, and I always divided the country this way, east and west. And then I went to the South, and I realized I had always lived in the same place. I had always lived in the North. So this is Southern postcard. 10,000 white-gloved dogwood butlers usher us through the South. Their black skins itch in livery, their bent waists ache with slavery, till June, not Lincoln, sets them free. But one has tossed his gloves down, see? Visions of Montgomery. History and wisteria, star-crossed flag of the Confederacy. Everywhere, bronze members of the cavalry guard their public square. Did Appomattox happen yet? And who surrendered, Grant or Lee? It's hard to tell. Okay. Oops. Okay. So this was in a part of the country that wasn't either north or south or Midwest or east. This is California. That's a separate country, I think, pretty much. And this is Menlo Park postcard. Sunday morning outside of San Francisco. Anonymous pink plants animate the stucco houses. Dawn is the pastel of deco paint, so common here. A little homesick, I look around for lyric things to comfort me. I pick a cyclamen, so real after LA's generic blooms, and best of all, I know its name. I missed that most so far from home, though I have come for it. Next door, a dryer starts to hum, and someone whose name I'll never know begins her day. The namelessness of hobos now occurs to me. How long could I go on this way? I think of all the towns I know my way around, though none as green as this, and wonder if I'd trade them in for wanderlust. By now, sun must have graced the bridge's red meridians, and Angel Island's rainbow lost its glow. Only tourists will have eaten breakfast in their zest to see what citizens will miss. I compromise. No photos of mysterious redwood forests. I've stayed inside instead and written this. So I will end with two local poems. I don't have a Falmouth postcard just yet.
Not yet.
But I will try to remedy that as soon as possible. But I know there are Falmouth postcards in the wonderful anthology that Alice and Rich and their colleague Robin co-edited, and I urge you all to get it. And I'm pretty sure that the library has a copy. So mine, one is just called Cape Cod postcard, and the final one is Provincetown postcard. So Cape Cod postcard. The map of the Cape flexes its muscles, Manomet bulges, biceps to P-Town's curled fist. Inlets ripple like arterial highways. I am here alone in the off-season. The hermit crabs and I have found 100 vacancies, unheated, and hope to last the weekend without crying. The wind's baritone is the only culture left here. It gropes for the grass's high notes in the rain. I've strained to hear the foghorn's boyish tenor, but it's gone, like the tourists' noisy children. Will they remember it as I have all these years, the ocean's rooster, or was it just another summer for them? Today I braved the beach to watch cold fishermen and waders casting off. What is it like to watch the water, not for metaphors, but fish? I see the ocean's muddy hemline rising like the tide of Paris fashions, or wish I were a boat in the crook of Orleans' arm. I hear of stranded pilot whales at first encounter beach and think of love. So who said poets should be practical? I hope this finds you well when it arrives. I first came to the Cape in 1970. I was 11, and it was the summer after my mother had died, and my aunt and uncle who lived in the Boston area, they and some cousins and other friends had bought some land in Eastham on the Bay side for $20,000, and it still took 3 families to afford that. And then they built a house, which they still had to rent out a lot of the time in order to pay for it. And so that was my first experience on the Cape, and there was very, very little down that way at that point. I think the Eastham Superette was pretty much the only place you could get food. And I fell in love and never fallen out of love with the Cape. And my father grew up in Boston, and he would always talk about how the ocean was so much more buoyant than Lake Michigan. And well, I thought I was going to be able to walk on water here. It was very disappointing. But that was the only disappointment I have to say about the Cape. So this is Provincetown postcard. Oh, and I have to say, we did, of course, go to P-Town that summer of 1970, and it reminded me of the difference between Chicago and Boston in one way, where my Boston grandmother worked at Kennedy's department store, and one of the choices when we'd come and visit was, did I want to go on the swan boats or did I want to go to Filene's basement? And Marshall Fields was this place where you still wore your white gloves and got all dressed up to go shopping. And of course there was hand-to-hand combat in Filene's basement. And so Provincetown was sort of the Filene's basement equivalent of the shore compared to Lake Michigan, and I just loved it. And this is many, many years later. So, Provincetown postcard. Christmas lights tattoo commercial streets, half-closed facades. Odd how seaside life goes on in winter, like the future of some high school friend you never thought of later, who by now has got 2 daughters and a second wife. The streets deserted, as if a villain and the sheriff were about to shoot it out, though nobody peers from behind these shutters except the endless pairs of sunglasses staring toward June. 8 o'clock. A church bell and one foghorn sing an aria so poignant I want to cry. The marina swizzles its lights into the harbor. It's Tuesday. I must be the last tourist in P-Town. How paradoxical home is. You must get sick of it to earn the right to have to stay in spite of that. I've never been able to take any place for granted, like these year-rounders I see scratching their lottery tickets at the Governor Bradford. Where would they go with their winnings? How do we know where we belong? Already I've eavesdropped twice in one cafe, copying local gossip, as if I might stay here long enough to make it pay. It's not as though I had no anchor elsewhere. No, in fact, they drop so readily, it scares me. Am I some hysterical patient who sops up others' symptoms like so much gravy? Or just someone with too many epicenters, like the bar scene here in July? Neither comparison comforts me much. Sometimes I just want to be able to touch one place on the map, like a lover's breast, and say, that's where my heart is. Which name would I shout in the middle of passion? Which town should I marry? Or is love arbitrary, like where we're born? The foghorn honks distractedly, a bored cabbie, impatient for his fare but paid to wait, who can't complain about his fate of unknown destinations any more than I can. It got me here, at any rate. So thank you for getting me here. And I'll put these by the books and my postcards in case you need to see the postcards from where, oh, these are from San Francisco, these are from Niagara Falls.
Thank you. So, questions from the audience. One of the things I wanted to say, hopefully you can hear me, one of the things I wanted to say about Jennifer's poems, we read together in, I think, 2006. I remembered them. I remember when we did the book, I remembered the East End postcard, and that poem's in the anthology. These are memorable pieces of art, literary and visual art. And what Jennifer is saying about humor in poetry, I was asked to do an event at the end of August at the West Falmouth Library, a favorite poems event, and Susie Bergman very kindly said to me, I hope they're not all downer poems. And I said, no, there really is a tradition of humor. And what I wanted you to hear in Jennifer's reading of her poems is there's music in the poems. You add a little bit of rhyme, internal rhyme, maybe not end rhyme, and what you get is something that your memory hangs on to.